North Dakota State Extension economist Frayne Olson is our market analyst this week. The USDA is scheduled to issue its estimates on quarterly grain stocks and prospective planting acres Thursday at 11 a.m. Central Time. The agency this week released its long-term projections for international production to 2025. Those numbers point to significant expansions of corn and soybeans in Brazil. It believes the country will increase its soybean output from 100 million metric tons this season to more than 131 by 2025. The USDA's forecast also shows Brazil growing about 25% more corn by that same year. Those predictions also include more corn and beans in Argentina over the next 10 years. Meanwhile, here in the States, winter wheat growers are battling up and down temperatures and a spring snowstorm. When we talked with Frayne Thursday morning, we began by asking about potential damage cold temps might have done to winter wheat over the last week.
Well, the early reports that were coming out indicated there might be about 20% of the hard red winter wheat crop that could potentially be affected. We're getting a little bit more updates, a little more information now flowing in. It looks like kind of the epicenter, the hardest hit area would be in south central Kansas. And the reason for that is a combination of how cold did it get, how long did it stay cold, and what was the crop development stage at that time. And again, with the freeze damage, it usually takes several days for some of that damage to appear, for the agronomists to get in there and try and make their estimates on what the damage might be. Best indication is we'll get some more updates, some little more details later this weekend or possibly early next week. And the thing that we're going to be looking for, the things that I'm looking for, of course, is the initial stages. But the reality is I don't know that the wheat market's going to be too wrapped around the axle about this one until we get some of the harvest reports. So I'll be very blunt. I think the wheat market could respond to that, the initial reports, but we're going to really need to hear the crop damage as the combines start rolling before the wheat market really takes off and pays attention.
What is the wheat market paying attention to in place of that international production?
Yep, there are some things internationally that the market's also paying attention to. The two areas we're focused on the most first is the Ukraine. We knew that the Ukrainian winter wheat acreage was cut pretty significantly last fall. It is now, just like the Kansas crop, is starting to break dormancy. The early indications are that their yield potential is starting to track lower. And so the market right now is expecting about a 30% cut in total production out of Ukraine versus last year. The other area we're watching pretty closely is what's happening in India. The last 2 years, the monsoon season has been lighter than normal. We're seeing some lower yields coming in. The other thing that's happened now is that the weather has shifted and they're now getting a lot of rain. And so for those farmers out there that understand the wheats, when you get rain on ripe wheat, the quality deteriorates fairly quickly. So there are some stories or some issues showing up that the Indian wheat market is low, but they may have to come into the world market and start buying some wheat. Again, we've got to be very concerned about prices because they're going to be a very price-sensitive buyer. But that is something, again, that the wheat market's paying attention to.
Let's move into corn and soybeans. What's your analysis of how those markets have moved over the last week or two with soybeans able to put on a little bit of money?
Yeah, I think there's a combination of things. I don't know that I can point to one thing specifically. From a fundamental standpoint, there's a couple of things showing up. We've got some shipment delays coming out of Brazil, the major ports out of Brazil. That's typically happens this time of year. But again, it's something that the soybean market's starting to pay attention to. The other thing that's happening, we're seeing a little bit of change in some of the currency valuations, which is, again, putting a little bit of support into the markets. And we've also seen some of the outside financial community change, or the speculators to change their positions from kind of a net short to more of a neutral position. So the combination of those three things has put a nice little lift into the soybean market. And again, I think for those that have some old crop soybeans left in the bin, this will be a good pricing opportunity.
What do you think is going to happen next week in the grain stocks and prospective plantings report?
Yeah, we're starting to get the first industry estimates are starting to come in now, in particular on the prospective plantings report. The few that I have seen, the numbers coming out of the private sector, very similar actually to what we saw out of the Outlook conference out of USDA in late February. So some key numbers, I guess, for farmers to be thinking about, if you can remember these. For the corn acreage, we're looking at about 90 million acres, which is up about 2 million from last year. For soybeans, the general guess is about 82.5 million acres, which is very similar to last year, actually. And on the wheat side, a cut back to about 51 million acres. So we're losing about 3.5 million acres of wheat. Most of that's, again, the winter wheat area. Some of it's going to be in the spring wheat. So those are kind of the numbers that I'm floating right now. If the prospective plantings report comes out significantly different, obviously there's going to be a price response.
What do you think we might be able to learn from that grain stocks estimate?
The key number I'm watching in the grain stocks report would be the corn number. One of the things we always have a challenge with is tracking feed usage. From an export standpoint, we get good weekly updates. We get some pretty good updates on the ethanol side with the amount of ethanol that's produced every week. But on the feed side, it's a really tough number to track. And so the only numbers we really get to follow how quickly we're using up is this quarterly stocks report. So that report, in my view, is going to be really important for the corn market.